Welcome to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. This audio uses AI narration to present our original book analysis. Today, we're diving into Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman. Now, he wasn't just a Nobel Prize-winning economist. He actively shaped public discourse, advocating for free markets and limited government.
Right.
His ideas had a huge impact, not just in the U.S., but worldwide. So in this deep dive, we'll explore the core arguments of his book, focusing on how economic and political freedom are intertwined, the government's role, and the potential downsides of too much intervention.
You know what's striking about Friedman's work is that he connects seemingly separate ideas. He argues that economic freedom isn't merely an economic goal, it's essential for political freedom.
And the bold claim, why does he link those two?
He believed that a society's economic organization deeply impacts individual liberty, for example. Centrally planned economies, where the government dictates production and consumption, they concentrate power and limit individual choice. Whereas market economies, built on voluntary exchange, they disperse economic power, acting as a counterbalance to political authority.
So it's about who holds the power, the government or the people.
Exactly. Friedman uses the Hollywood blacklist, where suspected communists were barred from working in the film industry. To illustrate this point, it was an attempt to suppress free expression. But the market, driven by profit and quality content, ultimately undermined it. Blacklisted writers like Dalton Trumbo, one of the Hollywood 10, continued to work using pseudonyms. Their talent couldn't be ignored. Producers, prioritizing their own interests, ended up hiring them because they were simply the best. The market, in a way, protected individual freedom.
That's a fascinating example of how economic forces can safeguard liberty. Now, Friedman isn't advocating for anarchy.
No.
He does see a role for government.
Absolutely. Friedman acknowledges that government plays a vital, albeit limited, role in a free society.
Where does he draw the line? What does he consider justified government intervention?
He outlines a few key areas. Firstly, establishing and enforcing the rules of the game for the market, like property rights and contract enforcement. This ensures fairness and prevents coercion. Think of it like a referee in a game, making sure everyone plays by the same rules.
That makes sense. Anything else?
Secondly, providing a limited set of public goods and services that are difficult to provide through the market, like national defense or roads. It's hard to imagine a private company effectively defending an entire nation or building a comprehensive road network. Thirdly, protecting children, who are not yet fully responsible individuals, requiring a certain level of paternalistic intervention. And finally, addressing what he calls neighborhood effects, where individual actions impose costs on others.
Could you give an example of what he means by neighborhood effects?
Think of things like pollution or contagious diseases. These are situations where individual actions can have negative consequences for others, and government intervention may be necessary to protect the common good. However, throughout all of this, Friedman emphasizes caution against government overreach, warning against policies that limit individual choice and responsibility. He stresses that personal freedom should be the guiding principle.
So a balanced approach, recognizing the need for government in certain areas, but always wary of it becoming too powerful. This brings us to another crucial aspect of Friedman's work, monetary policy. He dedicates a whole chapter to the importance of stability in this area. Why such emphasis?
Friedman was a vocal critic of central banks, particularly the Federal Reserve. He believed their actions actually exacerbated the Great Depression.
That's a pretty provocative claim. What evidence does he present to support that?
He points to the Fed's actions between 1929 and 1933, where they significantly contracted the money supply. A move, he argues, deepened the economic crisis. Imagine the economy as a car and money as its fuel. The Fed, by restricting the fuel supply, caused the engine to stall, making the situation worse.
So he's arguing that the government, in trying to fix things, actually made them worse.
That's his contention. He advocated for what he called a monetary rule, a set of predefined guidelines to prevent arbitrary and potentially harmful interventions by central banks. He believed that leaving too much discretion in the hands of policymakers could lead to disastrous consequences. This argument continues to be debated by economists today.
Yeah, and, Friedman argued that excessive government intervention in the market can sometimes create unintended consequences.
Okay.
For example, he was very critical of government-run education and proposed a voucher system as an alternative.
Interesting. What's the reasoning behind his critique, and how would this voucher system work?
Well, he believed government-run schools often stifle innovation and reinforce inequalities.
Imagine a system where parents receive government funds to choose the school they want their children to attend. This would foster competition and diversity within the education system, leading to better outcomes for students.
So instead of a one-size-fits-all approach, you'd have a marketplace of schools, each catering to different needs and preferences.
Right.
That could be a catalyst for innovation. This seems to tie back to his earlier point about the limitations of central planning.
Exactly. Friedman saw the potential for similar issues. In other areas where government intervention was the norm, he even challenged the conventional wisdom that monopolies are inherently bad.
That's an interesting take. How did he view monopolies?
He argued that in a dynamic market economy, the constant birth and death of businesses limits the long-term power of monopolies.
Okay.
New companies are always emerging to challenge the status quo.
It's a natural process of creative destruction, where inefficient companies are replaced by more innovative ones.
Precisely, and Friedman went even further, suggesting that government intervention is often a significant source of monopoly power.
Really?
Think about regulations, tariffs, and special privileges granted to certain businesses or labor unions. These can create barriers to entry, making it difficult for new competitors to emerge.
So in a sense, he's saying that the government sometimes creates the very problem it claims to be solving. It sounds like he's advocating for a hands-off approach to business, letting market forces regulate themselves.
Right.
Where does social responsibility fit into this picture? I'm curious about his stance on that.
One of Friedman's most controversial arguments is that the sole responsibility of a business is to serve the interests of its shareholders or members. Within the rules of the game, he pushed back against the idea that businesses should embrace broader social responsibilities.
So he believed businesses should focus primarily on maximizing profits, not necessarily trying to solve social problems.
Right.
That's certainly a thought-provoking perspective.
It is he worried that incorporating broader social responsibility into business decisions could lead to arbitrary decision-making and ultimately harm the economy. He believed that allowing businesses to focus on profit maximization within the framework of clear rules and regulations would lead to the best outcomes for society as a whole.
His views on social responsibility seem to align with his stance on government intervention, emphasizing clear boundaries and limited roles. This brings us to another area where Friedman sparked significant debate: social welfare programs. He was known to be quite critical of them. What were his concerns?
Friedman argued that many social welfare programs, despite their good intentions, often failed to achieve their intended goals and could even worsen the problems they were meant to address.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah.
What specific programs did he critique, and what were his reasons?
He specifically took aim at programs like public housing, minimum wage laws, and farm price supports.
Okay.
For example, he argued that public housing often destroyed more housing units than it created due to demolition during construction because it didn't address the root causes of poverty. It ended up concentrating poverty in certain areas, contributing to issues like urban blight and school overcrowding.
So he's saying that while these programs are intended to help, they can have unintended and sometimes negative consequences.
Right.
He wasn't against helping those in need, but he believed there were more effective and less distorting ways to do so.
Exactly. He believed that well-intentioned programs could sometimes create more problems than they solved.
So if he was critical of traditional welfare programs, what alternative solutions did he propose? How did he think poverty should be addressed?
Friedman put forward a rather radical solution: a negative income tax.
A negative income tax. That's a new one for me. How would that work?
Essentially, it's a guaranteed minimum income level that phases out as earned income rises.
Okay.
If someone earns below a certain threshold, they would receive a supplement from the government. As they earn more, the supplement would gradually decrease.
That's an interesting concept. It sounds like a way to provide a safety net without completely disincentivizing work. What did Friedman see as the advantages of this approach?
He believed it would be more efficient and less bureaucratic than traditional welfare programs. He also thought it would preserve individual dignity by providing support without creating a sense of dependency.
So it's about providing a helping hand while still encouraging people to strive for self-sufficiency. That's a pretty significant departure from the traditional model of social welfare.
Right. It's about empowering individuals while still providing that safety net. You know, this really aligns with Friedman's overarching philosophy of individual liberty and limited government, We've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
Of the relationship between economic and political freedom,
Right.
to the role of government, monetary policy, education monopolies,
Yeah.
social responsibility, and poverty alleviation.
That's a lot.
Capitalism and Freedom is a dense and thought-provoking work.
It definitely challenges you to think critically about the interplay between individual freedom and economic systems. Friedman doesn't shy away from controversial topics, and his arguments are consistently grounded in economic analysis.
Right.
So what do you see as the most enduring legacy of this book?
I think it's how Friedman really reframed the conversation about the role of government.
Right.
He encouraged people to consider the unintended consequences of policies, even those with good intentions. He reminded us that free markets, while imperfect, can be powerful drivers of wealth creation and individual liberty.
Why should these ideas matter to us today? How do they connect to the challenges we face now?
Because the debates Friedman was engaging in are still very much alive. We're still grappling with the balance between government intervention and individual freedom.
Yeah.
Still facing issues like poverty and inequality, still striving to create a society that is both prosperous and just.
So Capitalism and Freedom offers a valuable framework for thinking about these complex issues.
Absolutely. It's not a blueprint, but a starting point for thoughtful and informed discussion.
Okay.
Friedman's aim was to encourage reasoned debate and challenge conventional wisdom.
This deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about, and I hope it's done the same for our listeners. If you're intrigued by what you've heard today, I highly recommend picking up a copy of Capitalism and Freedom and exploring Friedman's ideas in greater depth.
I agree, it's a book that will stay with you long after you finish reading it.
To make it easy for you to dive in, we've included a link in the show notes where you can purchase the book directly. Don't forget to subscribe to Mindful Moments for more insightful book analyses like this one. We appreciate you joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.